Creating a portrait painting is something that requires both an understanding of drawing, value, color, anatomy, structure, but it also includes something else, that human touch, the spirit. My name is Yupari, and I'd like to welcome you to my studio this week so that you can watch this painting develop from start to finish with real-time footage. And along the way, I'm going to be talking about that mind and spirit aspect to portrait painting, that binding between the analytical nature that we human beings have and that inner creativity that we also have in order to create works of art that are reminiscent of the beauty and harmony and elegance that is in Mother Nature. But first, let me read out my palette to you. So I have 2 dots of titanium white, burnt umber, cadmium red, cadmium orange, yellow ochre, and ivory black. Just 6 colors for this palette. And for my mediums today, to the left of my cup here, I have just regular odorless mineral spirits, and I'll be using that to clean my brushes now and then. And to the right, I have a medium consisting of 1/5 stand oil to 4/5 odorless mineral spirits. And that will be my painting medium. And you actually won't see this cup for the rest of the video, but I'll point out now and then when I clean the brushes and use the medium. Getting started here for my drawing brush, I'm going to be using a size 2 filbert bristle brush, and I'm going to be using my burnt umber as my drawing color, and I'm going to apply just a little bit of my odorless mineral spirits, and a little bit, I mean a very tiny amount of my odorless mineral spirits. I'd say maybe 95% paint to 5% paint thinner. The less thinner, the better, but it is going to help the marks flow more easily onto the canvas. And remember, this week's topic is on mind and spirit. So I'm going to be moving a lot more rapidly through the drawing, and I'm going to be much more loose and expressionistic with this one. But if you want to see a more concise video on how to draw a model from a profile view, that is this view from the side, I'm going to leave a link in the description where I actually have created a drawing tutorial specifically for the profile view. So I'm very loosely just trying to block in the outside shape of the model's face in a very simplistic manner with straight lines and angles. I'm not trying to create a perfect outline or anything like that because I don't know what that perfect outline is yet. For me, I need to have something down to work with, a workable structure that I can understand, and that's the mind aspect talking. So the mind part of what's going on here is shape, proportion, and a simple structure. So that's what we're doing here with these marks, but I am moving rather quickly on the surface, and I'm trying to work in such a way that I'm liberating my brush. I'm moving rapidly across the canvas, making big, bold marks that are probably wrong and are probably not anywhere near the right place, but I'm just trying to get this canvas covered. And let's talk a little bit about the start of a painting. Especially in the start, there's a ton of spirit. Now, when I say mind and spirit, let's clarify what I mean by that. So mind is that technical aspect in your head. The mind is that analytical sense that gives you proportion, value, structure, perspective, and the spirit is what makes you create loose brush marks, loosely speaking. The spirit is what makes you, motivates you, drives you to paint. It's that almost that childlike mentality in your head where you have this box of crayons and you're exploring your parents' walls, trying to create this image in your head. That's the spirit. The spirit is just like you were as a child with your first box of crayons, just exploring what can be done with those crayons. We are essentially exploring this canvas as we go. I am covering the light side of the face with a warmer, a little bit darker, more in the middle value flesh tone, and I'd like to call this a false color, as you may have heard me say in multiple videos in the past. This color I made with the intention of painting over top of it and making my colors either cooler or warmer, lighter or darker, but it's more of a ground so that I can build more colors on top of. And since we're working in a very expressionistic fashion, I am just throwing paint onto this canvas. We are just laying it down. There are times where I spend a very long time with that burnt umber drawing, with that drawing brush, and sometimes incorporating an eraser brush till I get those shapes just right. And then there are other times like today where we are just throwing the paint down. We're just laying it down onto the surface, kind of hoping for the best. But I think that it's important to explore the paint onto the canvas in this kind of way once in a while. I know that it's much harder to gauge the drawing, at least for me. It does make the drawing a little bit more difficult when there's lots of big brush strokes, big masses of color, kind of a beautiful disorganization of sorts onto the canvas. But for these purposes, it's meant to break away from that procedural mindset, especially for someone like me that paints portraits on a regular basis, to break away from conventions, break away from any kind of ideologies, and just explore paint onto the surface. And right now I'm using my size 10 synthetic brush with a simple mixture of the ivory black and the yellow ochre, with just a little bit of my stand oil mix, and I'm just spreading it onto the background, and I'm going to keep this background color on my brush, on this brush, so that I can further articulate the outline of the profile view, that is the outside shape of the model's face. Going into the middle values that were already created on my palette, adding a little bit of burnt umber and cadmium red to the mixture, and I'm going to be putting in a dark light just underneath of the nose, and I'm also going to put another dark light on the eye socket area, and I'm doing this to create very simple planes. A plane is a three-dimensional conceptualization of a flat surface in three-dimensional space, and so that's what I'm creating right now, just simple planes. Each value that I'm adding onto this mass of paint is intended to be a plane change. Now I'm going a little bit cooler with my mixture now, perhaps a little too cool, but that's alright, for the flesh tones that I'm starting to add onto that first pass that I had established. I'm just trying to add a side plane to the side of the face and a highlight region for the zygomatic bone area, that cheekbone area. And now I'm going back into the dark mass of the hair. And I'd like to mention that I'm not using straight black. I'm actually using a little bit of the cadmium orange and some of the yellow ochre into the dark mass of the hair. I'm going to try to avoid using straight black until perhaps the end, I might use it just behind the ear or something like that, but I use straight black or straight white very sparingly because they tend to stick out, and I don't want anything to stick out too much just yet. And for this painting still, I'm more or less exploring the paint onto the surface. And now there is a sensibility for uh, the planar construction of the face, though it may not be that apparent. It is rather sloppy, but I'm allowing myself the chance to get things wrong. I'm keeping that idea of a sketch in my head, and I'm going to try to maintain the sketch mentality that is treating this like a sketch, like a piece of paper from your sketchbook, just loosely drawing, and moving the brush quite rapidly from the palette to the painting. This plane here is a little bit darker as it rolls across the side of the face, and I'm just applying the values across the side of the face. I'm even going to make some indications for where I think the mouth is going to go, but very loosely working around the canvas. This painting in particular for me is more of an exercise in letting go. It's more of an exercise in not being so analytically minded throughout the entire painting, and using a little bit more spirit into the painting. So I'm moving the brush a little bit more carefree onto the painting than I usually do. And I like to mix it up once in a while. Sometimes I'll take my time, much more time, with the simple shapes of light and shadow with my drawing brush, and then apply my values. But in other times I just like to throw the paint onto the surface, such as what you're seeing right now, and then sculpt the forms out more generally. Sometimes it's a good exercise to let go and to be as you were a child with your first box of crayons and exploring the surface of the painting, but still keeping that analytical mindset in your head where you're keeping your simple shapes of light and shadow, and you're keeping your planes well differentiated. I have these top planes that are facing the light a little bit more, and then it's getting darker as it goes across the side of the face, and that's about it when it comes to the analytical aspect of what's going on in my head right now. I'm more just trying to explore with these colors, and let's also talk about that 6-color palette that I'm using. I actually introduced the 6-color palette in last week's video, so if you haven't seen that video, I talk a little bit more about the pros and the cons of this 6-color palette. So I talk a little bit more about the color palette in that video. So if you want to see that video, I'll leave a link in the description to that video as well. But in any case, I'm trying to explore with paint, yet trying to keep myself organized with these planes, these lighter planes on the model's face, because these planes are facing the light more. And I'm also keeping my shapes simple and easy and workable, so that any kind of corrections will also be simple, easy, and workable. I'm going to be working the entire picture for a very long time before I start to render any one little particular area. So I'm going to be carving a little bit of the side of the model's nose. I don't quite know if it's at the exact shape yet. And so I'm going to now go into the dark mass of the hair. So I'm pretty much working all around the portrait right now. And so I'm just trying to get a more specified shape for the dark mass of the hair. And I'm not trying to use straight black for it either. I am using the ivory black, but I'm trying to mix it with a little bit of the burnt umber and some of the yellow ochre to bring it a little higher up in value, so it's not completely black, and also so that it's a little bit warmer Since this way of working is more of a direct painting approach, more of an alla prima approach, meaning that this painting is going to be completed in one sitting or in one day, I'm trying to do the best I can to work with simple shape. And it's easier to gauge a large shape sometimes than it is a specific outline. But in any case, I'm going to now put a darker value behind the ear. This area behind the ear is actually receiving the least amount of light than any other particular region of the painting. And now with a smaller size 2 round brush, I'm going to go into a little bit of the gray green mixture that I had on the side of the palette. So that green was actually ivory black with a little bit of the yellow ochre that was mixed earlier for the background color. So I use that with a little bit of the flesh tones to get a little bit more of a cooler value for the dark light. The dark light of that eye socket region. And now I'm going to go in with my drawing color and a little bit of the cool colors of the ivory black with some of the flesh tone to draw in the pupil of the eye. And I'm just roughly trying to guesstimate where it is. Now I'm going to put another a little accent for the tear duct. That mark is for the tear duct of the eye. Now, mind you, I don't know exactly if that is the place where the eye needs to be, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint this eye and adjust everything around this eye. And so remember, I'm kind of working both mind and spirit. This video is about that kind of a loose, almost kind of carefree way to paint a portrait. So I'm not going to be terribly focused on the exactness of where that eye needs to be. Rather, I'm just going to feel my way around the painting and place that eye, and if it's wrong, then so be it. I'm trying to paint in such a way that I can freely make these brush marks without being too timid of whether it's correct or whether it's wrong. And if I keep it simple and if I keep the shapes very easy, say maybe 3 or 4 values for that eye, it's not the end of the world if I have to change anything. So now I'm going to be adjusting the corner of the side of the model's face with that background brush relative to that eye. So you can think of that eye as a pivot of sorts. A pivot meaning that I'm going to be pivoting every other shape relative to this eye now. So I'm working from general to specific. I'm trying to build the surface via planes. So shapes of color and value. I'm working pretty broadly across the face, but I'm kind of focused a little more on this tear duct eye socket region of the face. Notice that I'm starting to add more values to it now. And so sometimes it's a good idea to break away from conventions. I usually work all of the proportions right away. So around this time with my usual painting videos, I already have something said for where the mouth is going to be, but not in this case. I'm working the areas in the top region of the face. Notice I'm starting to carve more and more planes now, and that's just breaking away from how I usually work, painting with the spirit, trying to be as expressive as I can be, and I'm trying to still keep myself organized in such a way that I'm still trying to construct the structures of the model's face with these planes. I'm trying to think about these planes. If it's facing the light more, it's lighter. If it's facing the light less, it's darker. But I think it's also important to note that in the end of the day, we are creating paintings. We are painters. We are human beings. We're not mechanical cameras. We're not designed to observe and recreate perfectly what is in front of us. And if that were the case, then we would want to take a picture. If you see something, if you see an eagle soaring across the sky or something like that, you're not gonna tell that eagle to stay still so that you can break out your paints. No, you're gonna take out your phone and take a picture. And so it's important to note that we are painters. We're trying to create paintings and not focus too much on that photographic image. Though it has a beauty in its own, photography is a beautiful medium, and it's a beautiful art form. But as painters, we're trying to distill what we're looking at in front of us into a more humanistic realm. We're trying to observe, interpret, and use our hearts to guide our paintbrush. So we're trying to utilize that analytical mindset, that rational mind that we have as human beings, and combine that with that inner creativity that we have, especially that creativity that we had when we were children, just opening up our first box of crayons and exploring what can be done. So we're trying to combine that analytical mindset with that inner creativity, and everyone has I believe everyone has their own unique approach to painting. Every painter has their own unique touch. All of you have something unique to you that makes your painting you. It makes your painting unique. Oftentimes, we may see it as a downfall. Maybe we have tendencies. I have tendencies sometimes to elongate the face, or sometimes my shapes are just too general. And that's fine. It's okay. I'm not trying to create a perfect image. Instead, I'm trying to create something that's human, something that has that sensible touch to it. And of course, I'm going to try to make it more accurate, make my drawings more accurate as I go. But I'm trying to keep in mind that this will always be a painting. And especially in current times, we are overwhelmed with a great number of photographic images in our heads, presented to us as ads on our phones, or advertisements on the side of the road. Everywhere you look, there is a photograph. And remember, photographs are beautiful in their own right. But as painters, we want to recreate the visual experience, what it is to see something as a human being. As the Impressionists did, they painted their first impressions of the landscape. They painted the impression of the subject that they worked on. And I know that Impressionism has a great deal to do with color, which is something that I also have to elaborate on in future videos, but it's important to paint the visual experience and not try to copy from nature. And with the nose here, all I'm doing is first painting in that dark light, and then the dark accent of the nostril as it rolls across the side of the nose, receiving just a little bit of shadow. And so I'm conceptualizing the curvature of that nostril and applying that gradation of value according to my perception of the structure of the nose, and of course placing that dark accent for where the shadow is underneath of the wing of the nose, creating the nostril, and then of course carving into the side of the nose now to create a more defined shape. But what I'm doing is I'm reading the information that my eye is receiving from the model. So I'm gathering all this information from nature, now placing a shape here for where I think that the mouth is going to go. But I'm gathering this information and I'm making decisions based on my understanding of value, proportion, and form. Now, after placing that value for where I think the mouth is going to go, I knew that that would allow me to place a darker accent for the corner of the mouth, and that will then allow me to properly gauge whether or not that is the correct placement of the mouth. But again, I reiterate, I'm not trying to copy exactly what I'm looking at. Rather, I'm trying to read the information that I'm obtaining by looking at the model and distilling it into a set of understandable, simple shapes, and I'm relating these shapes to one another. That's the way that I'm approaching this painting, and that's the way that I approach most of my paintings, in fact. But the difference with this painting and the way that this painting is being developed is that I'm focusing more on being expressive and painting from the spirit a little bit more with this painting. And I'm usually a good maybe 60% mind, 40% spirit. Some of you may say I'm like 90% mind, 10% spirit, but I think that it's kind of important to keep a balance between how methodical you work and how much you feel your way around the canvas. I can't emphasize this enough, and it's something that I forget all the time, to feel as well as to think when I'm painting. I'm trying to keep my values and colors as simple and organized as possible. And if you notice that I'm not really trying to perfectly copy the photograph is it's much warmer and the highlights are much stronger, and I think that's because of the way that I took the photo reference. I may have overexposed the photograph, so I'm kind of aware of that too as I build these shapes. Going to put a little plane here just beneath the nostril that's receiving a little bit more light, and then a little bit more orange onto that color, and then I'm going to put it on the side of the wing of the nostril. This area, this lower plane below the cheeks is receiving a little bit more light. Then I'm moving my way back up to the eye, the value of the eye socket as it rolls across and forms the upper eyelid. So I'm working all around the face, more on the top region of the face, but just a little touch here now to adjust and modulate this value so that it rolls more into the eye socket, creating that upper eyelid. So working from the spirit and really working all over this region of the painting. Now, in hindsight, if I had thought a little more into the actual technique of how this painting was going to be developed, then I probably would have spent much more time with that burnt umber drawing that I talked about. And now I'm starting to just use a little bit of the cadmium red and some of the middle value that was on my palette. And I'm going to use just a shape of paint to create the lower lip. And just using simple shapes of color in this way can create an image quite quickly. But it's also, as I mentioned before, it does complicate the drawing a tad bit. And so that's why I'd recommend, especially to the beginner, to spend more time working on just basic charcoal and pencil drawings in order to increase their ability to draw, but keep something like this as a separate exercise. And as I mentioned earlier, I will have a link posted in the description of this video where I actually explain more on how to draw a model from this view. I think it's a great exercise to change things up, especially we as portrait painters, we as oil painters, acrylic painters, watercolor painters, sculptors, whatever we may be. It's important to change things up a bit and work in different ways. And sometimes it'll work out, sometimes it won't work out. Here I'm using my size 2 round brush now to put a darker value for the cheek. The bottom of the structure of the cheek, this area is receiving a little less light. So I'm pretty much working from just using big piles of paint. I'm trying to sculpt my way around this canvas, and I don't usually work this way. I usually like to, like I said before, do that burnt umber drawing first. But it's important to sometimes take a step back and don't be so serious. Don't be so serious. Sometimes just it's a good idea to change things up a little bit, use a little bit more of a different palette or a different approach, and just experiment with it. Paint as if no one is going to see your painting. And I believe that's a good way to break any kind of tendencies that we may have from working in the same way all the time. Changing up your technique once in a while is also another way to get more of an outside perspective on your own work. Oftentimes as I paint, I get so focused, kind of almost like tunnel vision on my painting, that I don't really see what other people see. And that's oftentimes where I start to make mistakes. Drawing errors, value errors, color errors. And changing things up will help sometimes to get more of an objective eye. Or if anything, just have more fun and throw around paint like what I'm doing here. Just trying to feel my way around these shapes. I made the bottom area below the lower lip a little bit cooler with a burnt umber white and ivory black mixture to make a nice little muted green. And now I added a little more a lighter value for the top plane of the lower lip, and now I'm going back in with a darker brush to just try to carve that outside shape a little bit better. I'm trying to redefine where I think that edge is across the side of the face. And this is something that I would have established much earlier on in the beginning of the painting, but since I was just throwing paint on to the canvas in the beginning, I didn't really get to define exactly where that outer boundary of the chin region was. But that's okay, I'm just trying to feel my way around the canvas with this one. Another little technique tip that I didn't mention in this video that I usually do as I start to add this lighter value onto the lip is notice that my lighter values on my palette are actually a little bit higher up and my darker values are a little bit lower on the palette. So I like to call this a generic palette of basic flesh tones. But that's a misnomer because it's not really generic. It is they are my actual colors that I'm using. But I try to keep a gradation of value on my palette. So as I add these lighter planes now, you notice that I'm mixing on the top boundary of my puddle of paint here. And so, here I am on the middle region of the value scale on my palette. I like to have that organization on my palette, and the idea is that if my palette is organized, then it may seem like my painting is organized. That same thought process hopefully will show on the finished result. Not always the case, but it just helps me to maintain that order on my palette. Just working the halftones a little bit now, the side of the model's face, the side right next to the eye socket, just above the cheekbone is a little bit warmer and a little bit darker, so I had to keep trying to adjust those values relative to one another. And now I'm going back in with a nice dark warm color now for the shadow shape. I'm going to be redrawing that shadow shape and the side of the face. I did notice that I do have that shape still in simple shape mode where it's not too specified, and so I'm just gonna go in and flatten that out, a nice big flat dark shadow shape with the intention of coming back in and carving into it. And so I do that oftentimes. I place a little bit more of a shape than I would need, and then come back in like you're seeing now with a different brush and redefining that shape. It's kind of a lost and found sort of thing. And another organization or technique tip that is going on here is that I'm actually switching between brushes. So I have a different brush for the shadow, I have a different brush for the dark of the hair mass, and I have a different brush for the halftones. So now I'm using a brush for the halftones to build that area around the side of the model's neck, that long muscle that's going from the neck across to the ear. That is the sternocleidomastoid. If you grab onto your neck, it's pretty much that long neck muscle that we associate with people that are very well physically fit, or just skinny enough so that you can see that muscle. But that's what that light is, that light strand across the side of the model's neck. It's that sternocleidomastoid muscle, and that's that muscle that helps move the head around the neck. And forgive me if I got any of that wrong. I'm not an anatomist, so just telling you what's going on in my head as I paint that value. And of course I have a lighter value for the Adam's apple of the neck, but just a little light value for that. I don't want to overstate anything on the neck region. So now I'm starting to work the shape of the model's hair. I've tried to move the actual shape of the hair a little further to the right of the canvas because I had it showing a tad bit too much. And now with this golden ochre mixture, I'm going to be pulling out some more light for the ear. So I'm going to start working some of the warmer colors for the ear now. Using that halftone region on my palette now, with my halftone brush, I'm going to now, just with a simple shape, simple basic shape, carve out the shape of the ear a little bit more, but I'm also using a value that is a little bit lighter. And now I'm going to be carving into the side of the ear, so that's what I just did, to create a more of the shape of the model's ear. And that's what I'm going to be doing for the block in of that ear, just simple shapes with a loaded brush mark, and then I've just put in a dark indent for that dark shape onto the model's ear. Now I'm not going to get too technical with any of the anatomical features of the ear, so let's just call them shapes for now. There's this lighter shape now in the bottom portion of the model's ear, and this portion of the ear is going to be receiving more light than the region above it. So that plane of the ear is going to be lighter and facing a little bit more light. And then there's a lighter region right here, just above to the right of that section, but it's not quite as light as that bottom portion of the ear. And that's pretty much the conversation that's going on in my head as I paint these structures on the ear. There's a lot of, this thing is darker, this thing is lighter, and there's a lot of things going on in my head, not really trying to say that, oh, this is the helix or the anti-helix of the ear. Instead I'm saying, oh, this is a dark mass, and I'm going to flatten this mass out, which I just did, with a darker, warmer color. It is a little bit more purpley, and the way I achieved that was with the ivory black and some of the the cadmium red. And so here, this lighter region of the ear, this little band here, is making a curved shape, pretty much reminiscent of the outside curve of the model's ear. So I painted that shape in the same kind of curved direction as the outside shape of the model's ear. And now with the halftone, I'm going to be placing just a little bit of a darker value on the side of the ear right here, just on the side of that lower region of the ear that was receiving much more light. And at that point, I think I've said enough for the ear. I don't want to put too much information into the ear. And remember, this is about mind and spirit. So I pretty much just painted what I wanted to paint for the ear and nothing more than that. And now with the darker brush for the hair, just going to pull some of the hair a little bit further in front of the ear. So now we got a close-up of the face, and I'm going to be uh, re-evaluating the smaller shapes now for the model's eye. And so this region right here, that is the corner of the pupil of the model's eye, and I just put a little brush stroke there to help shape that value. Now with a different brush, I'm going to raise the value above the model's eyelid. And if I squint down at the photo reference, I don't actually see too much information for that area of the upper eyelid. So if I squint down and I don't see too much information on it, I'm going to paint it how I see it. I'm not going to put too much effort into trying to figure out something that just isn't there. And now with a little bit of the burnt umber and white, with a little bit of the ivory black, I'm going to put a lighter, cooler value now for the white of the eye, known as the sclera. But this isn't straight white, it's just a little bit lighter. And now with the darker burnt umber and the alizarin crimson mix, I put in just a single brush stroke for the tear duct. And I think that will be all that I will do for the smaller shapes of the model's eye. And now I'm going to move my way down to the bottom of the model's neck. That region is receiving a little bit more light, so I'm going to add just a little bit more light to the bottom of the model's neck. And now let's talk a little bit again about the topic of this video, other than the tutorial, is mind and spirit. And so if you notice, the photo reference and the painting differ a little bit more with this painting than all of my other previous paintings, or maybe that's just the way that my paintings are. But I'm really trying to not copy down what I'm seeing in front of me, and instead, as I mentioned earlier, I'm trying to interpret. I'm trying to interpret what I'm looking at. So I'm trying to recreate the visual experience, if you will. And that is, I see this region of the bottom of the model's neck a little bit lighter, so I'm going to paint it lighter. I do know that in the photo reference it is quite a bit warmer. But that's the point of this painting, of this video in particular, is to show you that you really don't have to have this copy-like mindset where you're going to try to recreate exactly what's in front of you. Instead, I want you to think a little bit more of that elegance in nature and that mind and spirit duality that goes on in the artist's mind. Look at all the famous portrait paintings of history, and I'm pretty sure that there's going to be some drawing mistakes. There's going to be differences between what the actual model looked like and the painting itself. Not to say that the artist was not skilled enough, but what I'm trying to say is that there's something more than just trying to get the likeness. There's something more than trying to get a perfectly rendered form, and there's something more than trying to get a perfect outline or a perfect drawing. There is that human touch that little bit of ourselves that we put into our artwork. And I think that that's something that we want to strive for, is to, of course, pay attention to technique, pay attention to things such as shape, value, and color, form. Uh, I'm not saying to ignore that stuff, but I'm saying that there is that creativity, that inner creativity that we all have as artists, and that is shown through the combination of both mind and spirit that we put into our paintings. But most importantly, paint in such a way that you enjoy the creative process. I enjoy things such as this little highlight that exists right in between the light and the dark of the eye. Just a little highlight right in between the light and the dark of the eye. And it may not have been like that in the photo reference, but who cares? That is an aesthetic thing that I like in many paintings, and so I just threw it in there. So remember, as representational painters, of course we want to get the drawing right, of course we want to get that technique down, but there's always that something extra that we human beings will put into our paintings. Think about it, in the future robots will probably be creating paintings for us, but they will never be able to capture that human soul, that human spirit. With that in mind, that concludes this week's portrait painting demonstration. I hope it helps you out. Always remember to keep that balance between mind and spirit. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for next week's video.